Two quick things before we start out today. First of all, pardon the audio, I'm still sick. I've been sick ever since the Aaron Ryan video. As it turns out, it was a lot more serious than we realized. Also, if the audio glitches at all, it's because my audio program is on the fritz and my microphone doesn't want to cooperate. So, yeah, I'm sorry about that. Anyway, let's get into it. How's it going, everybody? Fully Baked here. Metal Gear Rising memes have taken over my YouTube recommended page, which leads me to believe they really want me to make another video. So, I did. Honestly, this game is awesome. And while I may have some controversial opinions on this game's characters, it's a really fun game. My buddy Skitty can attest to this, but I spend half of my time in this game spamming the polearm's ground spin move, aka the Beyblade move. But what good would this be if I didn't have bosses to use it against? Thankfully, Kojima lined us up with a nice long line of feather rustlers to take down. Today, I'm going to be ranking all the bosses in Metal Gear Rising, basing these all on my personal opinions on how the fight itself plays out, and anything else that might affect how I feel. Two quick rules or notes right before we start. Number 1, if a boss becomes a common enemy in a later level, then it's not eligible for the list. This obviously means that there's going to be no Blade Wolf and no Grad Robot. Secondly, I will not be discussing the boss fights from Sam or Blade Wolf's DLC. Their fighting style varies quite a bit from Raiden, and I prefer to judge them based on how I take them down with a familiar moveset. Okay, that might sound dumb and arbitrary, but I'm doing it this way because I want to. So, sharpen those swords and let's give war a chance. This is all the Metal Gear Rising bosses ranked. Okay, so I may not hate any of the bosses in this game, but that doesn't mean there are none I dislike. With that, I really gotta ask, why doesn't Armstrong just fight me already? Maxor was right, this boss really is too large to be fun. After making your way to Afghanistan, you break into a military base in an attempt to find the senator, at which point he crawls out of the ground in a giant spider mech called Metal Gear Excelsus. He comes out and you have a face-off with him. A relative face-off from about a mile away, but still a face-off. He explains the beginning of his master plan, then hops back into the Metal Gear and the fight begins. And hoo boy, I don't care for this fight that much. My main problem with this boss fight is kind of a big one in terms of this game's combat. Its attacks are simply too slow and too predictable. Rising is at its best when it can nail the combat speed because there are times when it can veer too far in either direction. This is an example of going too slow. Way too slow. Not even kidding, but the first enemy in the game swings faster than this thing. Another thing I knock this fight for is the weird forgettability. With every other boss fight in the game, there are a ton of quotes I can remember, but with Excelsus, I don't think there are any memorable lines to remember it by. I know this game can do mech fights well because pretty much every enemy in the game is a mech of some kind. Even excluding the standard enemies, I know this game can do mech boss fights well because Ray exists and we'll get to him later. But I digress. Excelsus in a game with many bosses that can fight at borderline breakneck speeds just doesn't manage to hold his own. But there's no point in focusing on the fact that it's my least favorite boss fight in the game if I can't explain why he's a least favorite and not the straight up worst. So I'll bite. What are the good aspects? Well, the strongest one would probably be the finisher. Ripping off a giant sword from this thing and then not only being able to clash swords with it, but also being able to Zandatsu this massive sucker is awesome. Second to that would be the music. While it's probably one of the weaker boss themes, I'd be lying if I said I haven't casually sang The Unenlightened Masses to myself. The third positive pillar on which this guy stands would be that it introduces Senator Armstrong, who's honestly too fun for me to hate. Unfortunately, these positives are still outweighed by both its slow swing speed and forgettability. So no, it's not bad. It's just not particularly good either. I'm sorry, Senator. Note that I will not be knocking any of the bosses for their music. Case in point? God damn it, Monsoon. From a conceptual and a contextual standpoint, Monsoon is one of the best bosses, nay, characters in this entire game. His design is cool, his voice is slimy and very fitting of his character, and his philosophy makes him overall one of the most interesting characters in the game. His fight takes place shortly after the reveal of the nature of the cyborgs, which leaves Raiden in a very fragile mental state. This, Monsoon is able to taunt Raiden into unleashing Jack the Ripper, his true form. With this, Raiden has been broken down into his most brutal ways, which should set up for an absolutely brutal boss. Right? Well, unfortunately, my biggest praises for Monsoon come in everything but gameplay. If the problem with Excelsus was that its attacks were too slow, Monsoon's problem is that he attacks way too randomly and way too fast. Some attacks come out lightning fast, and some are slow as a snail. Some attacks are easy to parry, some are wild and completely unparryable. It's this inconsistency that drops the ball for Monsoon initially, but where my problem starts to magnify is with the introduction of Ripper mode, and mainly how this fight doesn't really take advantage of it at all. When going to hit Monsoon, if he's got a purple mist around him, it means he'll split himself up in order to avoid your attacks. This bothers me for two reasons. The first being that if this is the introduction of Ripper mode, and Monsoon has no minions to send your way to chop into itty-bitty foodstuffs, what's the point of this activation? Sure, it makes for an undeniably cool cutscene beforehand, but gameplay-wise, it doesn't add anything. Secondly is that hitting bosses outside of stun time is another thing I heavily praise this game for. With pretty much any other boss, it's encouraged to properly stun them and then deal damage, which makes sense, but truly skilled players can get those extra licks in. With Monsoon, you don't get that opportunity as he just dodges out of the way, meaning you have to play to the game's rhythm when you arguably should be able to go at your own pace, especially here. Like I said at the beginning of this entry, if Excelsus' problem is that he's too boring, Monsoon's is just being too annoying. However, like with Excelsus, credit where credit is due. Like I said, his general design is really interesting, the cutscene before the actual fight is one of the best in the game, and his theme is awesome. However, he's still mostly weighed down by his annoying attacks and his random nature. Sorry, meme machine, but 6 is as high as I'm willing to go. May your memes fly high, you absolute Chad. Alrighty, all entries from here on in are going to be focused on positivity because this is where things get exceptionally good. All bosses from here will have certain elements that come together that make them awesome. And I just gotta say, what a way to kick things off. This battle is a considerable step up in quality from Excelsus and Monsoon, primarily for how this fight flows, and for the context surrounding the fight. If I showed you this fight without context, you would probably have no idea that this was the first boss in the game, which really bolsters its memorability off the bat. If you know Raiden, and you know Raiden's games, fighting Rei as your first boss in the game is a considerable step up from how you fought it in the past, usually being reserved for the final boss, so it's already got that going for it. But let's discuss that flow, and how seamlessly this fight pulls it off. Despite being massive, Rei still attacks with relatively quick speed, unlike another mech I know. It stomps, fires lasers, swipes its tail, and really gives Raiden all it's got, which is perfect for a first boss. You can tell it's not holding anything back as you aim to take out its legs. Speaking of which, you really have a lot of availability when it comes to fighting Rei, both in being able to take out its legs and being able to parry almost any attack that isn't a projectile, dealing a lot of damage. However, it eventually swings its arm down at you and you know, casually flipping over a giant robotic killing machine and then slicing its arm off in midair. Yep, welcome to Metal Gear Rising. This boss is one of the best first bosses I've seen in any video game, perfectly letting you know this game is here to go above and beyond in every way. This ain't your dad's Metal Gear. Outside of setting up the tone for the game, Rei is a great boss on its own, with seemingly intimidating attacks being avoidable if you just follow the rules of nature. I just got that. I digress. It's a really great way to empower the player without directly making them feel too powerful, which works in tandem with the Sam fight on the train afterwards, but we'll get to that later. As for negatives I have with this fight, there aren't many, and the ones I have aren't very big. The music here, while fitting, is one of the weaker songs in the game. The stage you fight Rei on isn't very dynamic, which does happen later, but here, it's mainly just running back and forth, which can be repetitive. And even then, this opening bit on the streets is more engaging and memorable than the whole bit afterwards where you fight it on the rooftops. But even then, with these grievances, Rei is still one of my favorite opening bosses in gaming, and serves as a fantastic way to kick this game off. Okay, this one's going to require a little bit of explaining. Some people would rank Mistral among the weaker bosses in the game, so I want to go over the negatives first so I can truly explain her appeal. Firstly, yes, in a game with the zaniest boss fights ever created, the French masochist Doc Ock is still somehow one of the more forgettable characters. The overutilization of geckos in this fight can also get pretty annoying as they completely stun you until you button mash out of it, and even for a non-tutorial boss, Mistral is still pretty easy. As for everything else in this fight, awesome. Firstly, in terms of setting, Mistral has got to be one of the most unique and subsequently most creative and best fights in the game. This fight spans over 3 different areas over the course of the fight, each one serving a different interesting purpose. The first arena does a good job showing off how Mistral herself works as you're given ample opportunity to experiment and move around. The second area pulls back and kinda puts you into a test as you're forced into this 2D side-scroller section, which may be seen as restrictive, but I see it differently. It forces the player to adapt, but it doesn't feel outwardly oppressive. More so just having the player use the knowledge from Phase 1 in a more unique way. Phase 3 is similar to Phase 1 with the mostly open arena and the opportunity to attack, but with the attacks included from Phase 2, all culminating together with the lyrics. Ignoring it from a gameplay standpoint, level design wise, I'd actually consider Mistral to be maybe the best boss in this entire game. As for the actual gameplay, Mistral is really well executed. It's nothing I'd consider quote-unquote special, but they really use the full extent of the polearm, even if that extends to the overuse of the geckos in the fight. Speaking of the polearm, the reason Mistral is this high is because of l'étranger, or as I call it, the stranger. The French-Canadian in me aside, it's my personal favorite side weapon in the game. It doesn't completely break the game per se, but the stun time possible with this thing is ludicrous, and in PvE combat, being able to go this balls to the walls with the weapon design is something that I love to see. It's also got the freaking Beyblade move, which, you know, as I said earlier, kind of speaks for itself. So all in all, Mistral is one of the more unique bosses in this game. The level design and progression is excellent, her theme is really empowering and serves her fantastically, the weapon she drops is borderline broken, and even though she may be a bit forgettable from a character standpoint, she's a blast to refight every time. And even though she may be dragged down by said forgetfulness and the geckos, when it comes to getting beaten up by a French woman, there's no one else I'd rather have doing the deed. Okay, I can't go any longer without talking about him. Let's talk about Armstrong now or I'm going to explode. My track record on YouTube when it comes to discussing this guy is fraught to say the best. And while my initial opinion hasn't changed too much, his fight is a monumental beast. Being the final boss for a game as insane as this, you have to bring something insane to the table off the bat if you want to live up to the hype. So, a 200% health pool combined with the coolest looking arena in the game? Yeah, needless to say, Armstrong pulled it off with flying colors. The reason Armstrong is so fantastic mainly lies within how much he throws at you. He basically combines the lessons from every other boss fight in the game, cranks them up to 11, and then throws them at you with basically no time to breathe. He uses things like Mistral's range, Monsoon's parry, Sundowner's blade mode, and Sam's patience lessons, and either combines them or throws them at you at incredible speeds. As for what he himself introduces, it's also fantastic. He has massive area denial and vision blocking moves, meaning you're forced to pay constant attention to his fists to tell you what he's going to do. And even though he has that 200% health, he still feels the need to compensate by having an active healing move that you need to stop. It can initially seem cheap, but it really works in tandem with his other attention-grabbing attacks, so you notice when he actually does it, making it another great move in his arsenal. Armstrong also has a surprising amount of cutscene-style moves that force you to either quickly adapt to the situation after the fact, or reward you for noticing when they come out, and allows quite a bit of damage in with correct button presses. He's also got a surprising amount of character to this, really selling how much of a final boss fight this really is, due to having some of the most intense stares and quips in the game. And do I even need to mention his theme music? I don't think so. Everyone and their mother knows it. Senator Armstrong has basically everything in this fight going in his favor, with the one small exception of his difficulty. No matter how many times I come back to this, I always find this fight to be a considerable step up from anything that came before it, which initially makes sense as the final boss, but it feels more like an unfair leap than an actual progression. And yeah, it does hold the fight back ever so slightly. Don't let that distract you though. Armstrong is still one of my new favorite final boss fights in gaming, with a monster moveset and lesson utilization. If I ever remake my first top 10 list, just expect this to be on there somewhere. I'm not the first person to point this out about ranking lists, but a lot of the suspense related to the number 1 entry is kind of sucked out of the list when the number 2 entry is immediately revealed. And I'm going to be honest with y'all here, when it came time to decide which one would take the number 1 spot, the gap, it wasn't even close. Yeah, some of you have already probably figured out what number 1 is already, but for those of you who haven't, I won't spell it out until then. When it comes to ulterior motives in this game, none take the cake quite like the warmonger himself. The biggest running theme on the boss fights in this game is that your fights with them have another purpose outside of just trying to stop Raiden. With Mistral, it's confusion, Monsoon is masochism, Armstrong is ideals, and we'll get to the other one. But none of them top Sundowner in that department, who likes to fight because he likes fighting. Not out of a sense of purpose or deriving pleasure from the pain, he's just a psychopath who likes fighting dudes, which I heavily commend. As for the actual fight, it's got one of the most unique boss concepts here, Sundowner's shields and how they actually play into the fight. When the fight starts up, he breaks these things out and charges at you, and if you parry him in time, you can activate Blade Mode to cut through the shields, allowing stun time to cut them off. This is deceptively easy, as Blade Mode has not really been used for more than just hacking and slashing up until this point, with the occasional singular weak points. Here though, you have to hit all of the weak points or the shields explode, dealing a good chunk of damage to Raiden. Not only is this a suitable punishment for underestimation, but it also forces the player to quickly adapt to this change, which it pulls off flawlessly. This shield mechanic is one of the most clever in the whole game, as it's not annoying like the geckos or purple mist. You're always given ample opportunity to avoid and counter this gimmick, which is really commendable. Another thing worth noting about Sundowner is that you don't even have to activate his second phase in order to kill him. You can take him down, shields intact, which is just another quirk of this fight that just adds to my enjoyment. However, if you do get the shields down, he basically becomes an area denial machine by using both his pincer attack and ripping up giant metal poles from either side of the arena in order to hit you. And all this damage is without even mentioning the fodder enemies you can get health and blade mode back from, or the helicopters you have to focus down unless you want to risk losing stun time and large swaths of health. By all accounts, it's a sensory experience that somehow doesn't even end there. Once you get Sundowner all the way down, his fight isn't quite over yet as he grabs hold of a helicopter and launches missiles at the helipad, forcing you to hook into one of the glider enemies as you ride up the HQ, dodging falling debris, allowing you to finally finish him off. So yeah, I really have no grievances with this boss fight. I may not be the world's biggest fan of Red Sun, his boss theme, but damn it, there's too much to enjoy here solely from a gameplay and uniqueness perspective that he easily gets top marks. But even in spite of all this praise, he isn't my favorite boss in the game, so let's see who that is. In my research for this video, I found a lot of people ranking this guy pretty low, but in the end, I guess I'm just immune to good opinions. And knowing how many of them I've got on this channel, I think it's fair to say it's the only thing I've ever known. Of course Sam was going to come out on top. He has literally every aspect of this fight working in his favor, including ones I haven't even brought up yet. This duel, is easily one of the most built up to in the entire game, with Sam not only being the first enemy you encounter, but also being the one responsible for putting Raiden in his mech condition after cutting his eye and hand off. He's the perfect antagonist to earn this middle of the desert duel. Speaking of which, the setting here is fantastic. The middle of absolute nowhere, with no one else but you to witness. Unless you count Blade Wolf, which I don't. My favorite part about this entire fight is how, for the lack of a better term, brutally honest it feels. There is no gimmick here. No area denial, no shields, no geckos, no purple mist. It's you, Sam, and your swords in a one-on-one. Not even any fodder enemies to stand in your way or get health back from. Do you want that blade mode or health back? Good luck. Speaking of which, Sam actually provides you quite a lot of ample opportunities to attack freely, making it so that you really feel you're on a similar playing field in combination with the lack of gimmicks. He's the only boss where, whenever I have to fight him, I unequip auto heal and face him as raw as he's facing me. And I will admit, this may sound like a dumb idea, but this is immediately taken back considering his attack speed. It's not too fast, not too slow, it's perfectly paced to keep you on your toes, yet in a risk-taking mindset. The liberty and flexibility does go down over the course of the fight, but like Sundowner, you're given ample opportunity to adapt. It also serves in Sam's favor as it shows he's taking the fight more seriously as it goes on. I seriously can't get over how even if you see this from a design and concept standpoint, this fight still stands leagues ahead of anything else presented. His theme is also easily my favorite in the whole game, as it's incredibly motivating and an absolute jam the whole way through. And unlike every other boss fight in this game, you don't get to rip and tear Sam into pieces, which once again demonstrates the respect and honor in this duel. So, this fight gives me my favorite character, weapon, and song in the game. It was no question to me that it'd top this list, and he now ranks among my favorite boss fights of all time. I'm gonna go take some antidepressants and get to work on the next script for a video that'll release way later than I intended to. Yeah, this thing is slowly killing me. Seriously though, have a good day everybody, and thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time.